Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Aleph. We are on the second line, second word of Kuf Aleph Amid Aleph. Let me share my screen and we'll really get started. So we today's daf is almost a beautiful standalone, meaning you don't need almost any background to understand today's daf. But let me just tell you how we're getting to this daf. Yesterday we were discussing the duration of aninut. Aninut is the state in which one exists after one of their seven close relatives passes away, and before, in general, it's at least the day of the death, and it can be, at least according to the rabbis, continues until the burial, whenever that may occur. So it could be for more than one day, according to the rabbis. Biblically, it's basically that day and possibly that night as well. That was the debate that we were having yesterday. But as part of that discussion, we quoted from the Torah in connection with in Parsha Shmini. We quoted, the aftermath of the death of Nadav and Avihu during the course of the inauguration ceremony for the Mishkan. So the Mishkan was being dedicated. You can imagine how terrible this must have been. And in the middle, Nadav and Avihu offer a strange fire and are killed by God. And so, notwithstanding, and so as a result, certain sacrifice, one particular sacrifice seems to have been burned instead of eaten. And Moshe gets upset. So let's go through the outline of the story, and then we can go into the detail of the Gemara and go through how two different interpretations of this story. So the main elements that everybody agrees on, because those are literally the words in the Torah, is step one. Although not everybody agrees the ordering of it, but this is the order that the Torah gives it to us. One, Moshe tells Aaron and his remaining sons, namely Elazar and Itamar, that they should eat from the mincha and from the breast/thigh of the shlamim. Moshe then asks, well, what happened to the chatat? Again, that's not the carbonot that he mentioned to them, but he asks about the chatat. And he gets upset with Elazar and Itamar when he learns that it was burnt, as it was not a sacrifice whose blood was brought into the Kodesh. That's the source for the fact that if you bring blood into the holy or holy of holies, even when it's not supposed to be brought there, now all of a sudden that sacrifice is invalid. And so as a result, Moshe's like, it wasn't invalid for that reason, so why did you burn it? And Aharon then responds. Again, Moshe was angry with Elazar and Itamar. Aaron responds effectively on their behalf and says, would God have approved Aaron's own eating of these offerings given what happened? And Moshe recognizes that Aaron is correct. Now, what exactly is the point that Aaron is making? That's what's unclear, and what the debate that we're about to see is going to be all about. And so with this background, as we pick up with the second word on the second line of Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph, the Gemara considers an aspect of this story, and it essentially offers two different interpretations. So let's take a look and we'll see. So first, we're going to ask a question. We're going to outline two different brises that are going to effectively contradict one another, and then we're going to try to explain them. So Tanu Rabbanim, Kichein Suvesi, right? During the course of this conversation that I've just outlined to you, it says, for that's how I have been commanded, Kasher Tzivesi, and then it says also, as I had commanded, and it says Kasher Tzivah Hashem. Now, actually, these are not in direct order. The first one is from Perek Yud Pasuk Yud Gimel. The second one is from Perek Yud Pasuk Yud Chet. That's 18, and then the third one is from Perek Yud Pasuk Tezvaim. So it goes 13, 18, 15 Tezvav. So as a result, there's it's not in the right order, but the bottom line is there are these three different verses. So what are these 3 verses trying to teach us? So now the Gemara says, we got 3 references. Torah doesn't always say in Moshe's name, doesn't always have Moshe say, this is how God commanded me to act, or this is what I've said. So why in these 3 cases? So the Gemara explains, or the Bryce explains. Kichein tsuvesi. Why did I say that? Ba'aninut yochluho. That the idea is that yes, in fact, while one is in aninut, while one is awaiting the burial of the dead on the day that the person has died, that is, they should still eat the mincha offering. That was the context in that verse. And therefore, even if you're in aninut, kasher tzivesi, as I commanded, b'shas masa amar lahen, meaning I told you all the way back when Nadav and Avihu died, as Rashi says, b'shas maisa. Take a look, last line on Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph in the wide lines at the top, b'shas maisa, k'she'ira lahem aninotam, when the status of aninut befell them. Amar lahem, Moshe said to them, Shelo yimne'u me'achilas kodshim, don't refrain from eating the holy sacrifices, hayom, of today, sheshama mepi hagvur, because he, meaning Moshe, had heard from Hashem, shechaluk aninut hayom bekodshim mishar yomim, that specifically today, meaning that day during the course of the inauguration ceremony of the Mishkan, is going to have a different aninut from the aninut that we have today. And now that he sees that the sacrifice was burned, Amar lahem, he says to them, Achol tochluota hayalahem laochla. I told you to eat it, and kasher tzivesi, as I commanded you, b'shas amasa. That's what Moshe's upset about, because he thinks that they had violated effectively a direct order. And then finally, back into the Gemara, first word. Last word on the 4th line. Kasher tziva Hashem, lo me'elai ani omer. I didn't make this up. I was telling you what God commanded. And so as a result, that's highlighting how we need to, how Moshe was telling them that effectively they should eat sacrifices even in their state of aninut. So that's brisa number 1. Conclusion, we eat sacrifice, in that particular instance, you're supposed to eat sacrifices even though they were onanim, even though they had just lost either their sons, his sons, right? One of the 7s, right? The sons are the sons of Aaron, they're brothers. So those are both categories that you have. So, and just to go through them, right? Father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, spouse. Those are the 7. Okay? So the point is that that's who passed away, because these are their direct relatives. So Uraminhu, 1 second, there's another brisa that seems to suggest that maybe they weren't supposed to. Because that brisa says that the sacrifice that was burned, that the Torah tells us about, it was burned because they were an aninut. Lekach ne'amar ka'ela. And that's why when Aaron responds to Moshe and he says, this is what happened to me today, this ka'ela, this is what's happened to me today, that's the loss of his sons. That's aninut. So here we have in brisa number 1, we say aninut does not stop you from eating sacrifices. In brisa number 2, we say it absolutely does stop you from eating sacrifices. So what's the story? So we're going to offer 2 answers. So first we'll offer Shmuel's answer. Lo kashya, ha Rebbe Yehuda, ha Rebbe Nechemya. This first one is the opinion of Rebbe Yehuda, and we'll see it's also the opinion of Rebbe Shimon. And the second one is the opinion of Rebbe Nechemya. Titania, because we have the following brisa that outlines the machlokus. Bipnei ani nutzrafuha lekach ne'amar ka'ela divrei Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia is like the second brisa that we just quoted that says that you burn it because of aninut, and that's exactly what he just said. I mean, it's almost the word for word the brisa that we just had. And Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon omrim mibnei tuma nisrafa. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon says it was not burned because of the aninut. It was burned because the sacrifice became subject to tumah. And so as a result, that's why they would say, like the first brisa. The first brisa says that you're supposed to eat even if you're in aninut at the sacrifices, if you're a Kohen. And so as a result, at that time, because again, a special rule for that time. And so the point is that that's who's the author of the first brisa. So we've solved the problem according to Shmuel. She'im ata omer mibnei aninut nisrafa. And now Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon make three different arguments. First argument, because if you, meaning they're talking to Rabbi Nechemia, and they're asking three questions, you're going to tell us that it's because of aninut that this is what happened. So hayu lishlashtan shis revua. There should have been three sacrifices that were burned if you can't eat a sacrifice when you're in the state of aninut. And we'll see what those three are later today. We are going to ask the question, what three are we referring to? And so Rashi even tells us that we're going to smack in the middle of Rashi, of the narrow lines of Rashi on Kaf Alef Amud. It says, Hayalahem l'shloshtan, t'shlosha seirim karvu lahem, kidel kaman. There were three he-goats that were offered that day, as we will see momentarily. So davar acher, moreover, another point that that is a problem with your interpretation, Rabbi Nechemia, hayu roi la'ochlan la'erev. You know what? They could have eaten at night. As Rashi points out, that even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that aninut continues from biblically into the night, it's clear that the Torah was trying to highlight some reduction, some ability to eat in a state of aninut. And so even if you were to say that they were onanim and therefore couldn't eat it during the daytime, but they could eat it at night, and it was still edible at night. And so why didn't he would agree, as Rashi says, he would agree that that day would be, that night would be permitted, okay, even if the daytime was not. And certainly Rabbi Shimon's the one who says that aninut at the nighttime, even that first night, is only a rabbinic enactment. Correct. And so for sure, he would say that you would be able to eat. So that's point number two to Rabbi Nechemia. You're telling me, Rabbi Nechemia, that they didn't eat it because they were onanim and therefore had to burn it, but they could have waited until the nighttime and then still eaten it, and it would have been fine. And davar acher, moreover, I'll tell you something else. There was another Kohen around who could have eaten it. So don't burn it. Let the last Kohen, one more Kohen, eat it. V'halo Pinchas haya imahen. Pinchas was around, and Pinchas is not one of the 7 relatives, close relatives. It was his uncles who were killed, but it was not one of the 7 close relatives. Uncles are not one of those relatives. And so therefore, he would be eligible to eat the sacrifices. So why didn't he eat the sacrifices? So those are the 3 questions. We will get back to those questions shortly enough. But those are the 3 questions in this brisa. But Rava says, you know what? Shmuel, I understand your point, that you could say that it's a machlokus, but I can tell you that actually it could all be Rabbi Nechemia. So Rava Amar, Idi Rabbi Nechemia. Both these brises are actually like Rabbi Nechemia. V'lo kashya, One case is when we're dealing with sacrifices of that particular moment, meaning that it's all associated with the inauguration of the Mishkan. But the other sacrifices, the sacrifices that you're not allowed to eat in a state of aninut, those are the ones that are for all generations. So the idea that Rabbi Nechemiah has is the following. When we say that the law of aninut was suspended, it was not suspended for all sacrifices at that time. It was suspended only for the sacrifices that were unique to that time. So we'll see exactly which ones those are in a moment when we get to the three sacrifices that we'll be talking about later. But Rabbi Nechemiah, Heichim Etaretz Lahani Karai. So 1 second. So how does Rabbi Nechemiah understand the verses? For Rabbanan, and namely Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, as Rashi tells us, how do they understand these verses? So we're now going to go through all of the verses, or the basics of the verses, and imagine the conversation that happened between Moshe and Aharon during that time. So let's take a look. First, we're going to offer Rabbi Nechemiah. Rabbi Nechemiah retires lehu lahachi. Here's how Rabbi Nechemiah would explain the verses. Madua lo achaltem. Why did you not eat this korban that we're going to see is the chatas of Rosh Chodesh, the sin offering offered on Rosh Chodesh? Amar lo Moshe la'Aaron. That's what Moshe says to Aaron. Shema nichnas dama lifnei v'lifnim. Did you accidentally bring the blood of the sacrifice into the Holy of Holies, and that's why it then became not kosher, and that's why you chose to burn it? So Amar lo, Aaron responds, Hein lo huva estama. No, it wasn't brought in to the holies. So Shema chutz l'mechitza sayatzas. So Moshe goes back and says, oh, maybe you took it outside, and that's why, again, if you bring the blood outside the Mishkan's confines, the curtains of the Mishkan, that would also cause it to be no longer kosher and would be required to be burned. And Amar lo, Aaron's response, no, bekodesh haita. It was always in the courtyard, in the holy. And so as a result, that's not the reason that we burnt it. So Moshe asks, all right, the Dilma ba'aninut akriv tua uvsal tua. So maybe you offered it while you were in aninut, and that's why it was disqualified. So Amar lo, Moshe, v'chiyehem akrivu ani hikravti. Did my sons bring this sacrifice where bringing it as an onain would be a problem? I, the Kohen Gadol, brought it. And the law of the Kohen Gadol is that a Kohen Gadol, as we saw over the last few days, can bring a sacrifice even in a state of aninut. He may not be able to eat the sacrifice, but he can still bring the sacrifice. So v'amar lo, Moshe responds back, Hein lo huva es dama uvakodesh haisa. But 1 second, if you're telling me all of this, that there was nothing wrong with how the korban was brought or where the blood went, well then why didn't you eat it? Ba'aninut yochluha. You should have eaten it in your state of aninut. And so Amar lo, Aaron responds back, V'tikre'ana osi ka'ela v'achalti chatas. Should what happened to me today like this have happened to me, and I eat the chatas hayom of today? Hayita beinai Hashem? Would that have been good in the eyes of Hashem if I were to eat this chatas today? So Shema lo shamata ela b'kodshe. Maybe what he's really saying, what Aaron is really saying, the Gemara is explaining, according to Rabbi Nechemiah, is maybe you didn't hear that I am supposed to bring, that when you said that I'm supposed to eat, even in Aninut, is specifically because Shesha. only in the sacrifices that are of this moment, meaning that they're associated with the inauguration of ceremony of the Mishkan. Because if in fact we're talking about regular sacrifices, kal v'chomer maaser hakal, I can give you a kal v'chomer from Meiser Sheni, the light Meiser, the Meiser that regular people can eat. Because what is the law of Meiser Sheni? Uma Masa Sheni Maser Hakal. When it comes to Meiser, which is lenient, and we're talking about Meiser Sheni, Amra Torah lo achalti be'onimi menu, that we have to declare that you did not eat from the Meiser Sheni while you were an onain, while one was in mourning on the day of a death. So the Kodshe Doros lo kol shekain, when it comes to holy sacrifices, that's much holier and much more limited on who can eat it. Of course, an onain is not supposed to eat a regular sacrifice. So miyad, with this background, now we understand why the Torah tells us immediately, Vayishma Moshe v'yita beinav. Moshe responds, oh, it was good. You're right. You're 100% right, Aaron. Hoda below Bosh Moshe Lomar. Moshe wasn't embarrassed to say lo shamati. After all, he could have said, I didn't know that law. God never told me that law, and nobody would be the wiser, because who's the only one who would know what Moshe was commanded by God? Only two beings, Moshe and God. So he could have said that, Ela Amar, but rather he was straightforward and honest. Shamati v'shachachti. He said that I had heard that and I forgot. And so as a result, the bottom line is that according to Rabbi Nehemiah, what the Torah is telling us is that specifically the chatas of Rosh Chodesh, which is an offering that is meant for all generations, that sacrifice was the one that was burned, because even though an onin was allowed to eat the sacrifices of that day, it was the sacrifices that were only for that day and not for future generations. So that is Rabbi Nehemiah. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Heichim etartzi lahu. So now we need to explain this according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Hachim etartzi lahu. Here's how they explain it. First part is identical. Madua lo achalta besachatas b'makom hakodesh. Shema nichnas damal lefnei v'nefnim. Did you bring Did you bring the blood into the holy of holies? Amar lo hein lo huva es dama el hakodesh penima. We didn't bring them in to the sanctuary. Shema chutz l'mechitza sayatzas. Maybe they went outside the boundary. No, Amar lo hein b'kodesh haisa. No, they were always in the Kodesh, in the courtyard, in the holy place. So they were where the blood was, where it was supposed to be. Maybe you offered it as you were in a state of aninut. Again, same question that we had before, and same answer. Amar lo Moshe hein hakrivu l'fasla b'nehu ba'aninut. Fine, it would be a problem if my sons offered it as in aninut. But ani agrivtua, I offered it. Hikravtia, I'm the one who offered it, so it's not a problem because I'm the Kohen Gadol. Now here we get the little bit of difference. V'dilma agav mararaichu pashatu v'itamai. Maybe because you were so sad and bitter about the death of your sons, it got tamei and became tamei. Amar lo. So Aaron responds back, Moshe, kakani be'inecha, is this how little you think of me? That shani mevaze kodesh shamayim, that I would let bad things happen to the sacrifices for heaven? V'tikrena osi ka'ela, even if things like this were to happen to me. V'afilu eila v'ka'ela ani ein ani mevaze kodesh shamayim. I wouldn't allow bad things to happen to sacrifices, even if many bad things were to happen to me, Aaron says. So Amar lo, v'i hein lo huva estama, if it's all true that it wasn't brought to the inner sanctuary, uva kodesh haisa, and it was in the kodesh the entire time, achol tochlu osa b'kodesh kasher tzivesi, well then you should have eaten it as I had commanded you. Ba'aninus yachlua. You should have eaten it when you were in aninut. Amar lo. So Aaron responds, Shema lo shamata ella balayla. Maybe the aninut that I was let go of, the aninut was not a broad aninut. It was not for every sacrifice. It was not for all time. It was specifically, it was specifically at night that I was supposed to be able to eat it. To Eva Yom, because if I was supposed to eat these sacrifices during the day, Kal v'chomer m'maiser hakal, I could make us Kal v'chomer from Maiser Sheni, which is more lenient. Uma Maiser hakal Torah lo achalti ba'on Amra Torah lo achalti ba'oni mimenu, that the Torah tells us that you shouldn't eat from it. Kodesh chamur, the holy sacrifices, which are much more stringent. Lo kol shekain. Certainly, I shouldn't eat it during the day. So when can I eat it? I can eat it at night. So the idea here, what the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon on the one hand and Rabbi Nechemiah is, whereas Rabbi Nechemiah says no, it was specifically certain sacrifices were allowed to be eaten even during the daytime. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say no, the law of aninut was going to apply to all sacrifices in the same way. And the change that was made to be lenient in aninut was only with respect to the nighttime. And therefore, they were waiting until the nighttime in order to eat it. So, miyad vayishma Moshe. And there, too, we have the same conclusion. Moshe heard. But as we turn to Kuf Aleph Amud Bet, 101b, vayitav beinav, and it was good in his eyes. Lo bosh Moshe Lamar. Again, lo shamati. It wasn't, Moshe was not so embarrassed that he said, I didn't hear this. Ela shamati v'shachachti. He says, I heard it and I forgot. All right, well then why didn't they leave it over until the night and eat it at night? Why was the Chatas of Rosh Chodesh not eaten at night? So Tuma Ba'onis Basa, in the end, as Rashi says at the top of the daf, it became Tuma by accident. Shuratzu l'shahosa, right? Top Rashi on Kufal of Amabet. Shuratzu l'shahosa ad halayla ula ochlan kulan yachad. That the plan is that they were all going to eat from the sacrifice together. V'nitmeis ba'ones, and it became accidentally tameh, and that's why it ended up being burnt. Okay, so bishlama. So now we're going to highlight the advantages of each different approach and ask questions on the other approach. Again, on the screen, I've highlighted with an asterisk the 3 lines that change from Rabbi Nechemiah's approach to the one of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so Bishlam ala Rabbanan Hainu Diksiv Hayom, that when it comes to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, that's why it says today, meaning during the day. When Aaron responds to Moshe and says, would it have been good for me to eat it during the day, Hayom? That makes perfect sense, because he's saying during the day I can't eat it, but at night I could have eaten it. But the problem is that it became tameh. El Rabbi Nechemiah, my Hayom. What do you mean by Hayom? So Chovas Hayom. No, what it means by Hayom is specifically the obligations of today that are for future generations as well. Would God have been happy for me to eat the chatas hayom of today that is going to be a chatas that is going to be offered into the future? It's not just for this sha'ah, for this moment in time. It's for future moments. So that's how Rabbi Nechemiah would understand that. So Bishlam or Rabbi Nechemiah Hainu Diksiv Hein Hayom. So also when Rabbi Nechemiah, according to Rabbi Nechemiah, however, you can say it makes more sense for him, because when he says in Pasuk Perik Yud, Pasuk Yud Tet, when he says today, the point is that I'm sorry. So when it says in that pasuk that this sacrifice was offered for the day, right? So it means that the point is that this sacrifice was offered was offered was a obligation of today and for future generations, and that's why it was specifically not eaten. El Rabbanan, but according to the rabbis, my hein hayom. What does it mean that this sacrifice was offered for the day? So hachikamar hein hekrivu. Was it they who offered it for today? Meaning, it was the idea being that it was referring to the obligation. Second. It was referring, what he was asking was whether it was his sons who offered them. And of course, the answer was no. What Aaron was saying was a reflexive question, was a rhetorical question, excuse me, a rhetorical question. He was saying, did my sons offer this today when they were in Aninut? No, it was I who offered them, and that's why they are continuing to be kosher. That's why that's not the reason that they were burned. And so as a result, we've tried to highlight advantages and disadvantages to each approach. We've come up with two completely valid explanations of the psukim as to how we understand the story of Aaron and his sons after the death of Nadab and Avihu. So now we go back and we need to address the questions that were asked. But first we have to explain the point and what were those three sacrifices. So Amar Mar we said that they should have burned three sacrifices. So my shalashtan, what are the three sacrifices? So we have a brisa that answers it. Titania. Ve'esir hachatas darosh dorash Moshe. Moshe inquired insistently about the chatas, the goat of the chatas. So what is that? What is that all referring to? So it's referring to the fact that he was actually asking about three different sacrifices. Seir, zo seir nachshon. That is the when it says he goat, it's referring to the he goat of Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was the prince of Shevet Yehuda, and the prince of Shevet Yehuda offered the first sacrifice of the was offering the first of the 12 prince sacrifices, and that sacrifice was offered on this 8th day of the inauguration ceremony for the Mishkan, and that day was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And so here he's offering this sacrifice, and so that's goat number one. Chatas, zo chatas shmini. That is the sin offering, refers to the sin offering of the 8th day of the inauguration ceremony. So that's a second sacrifice. And that's the sacrifice that was referred to in Vayikra Perek Tet Pasuk Gimel, where it says, that you should take a he-goat as a sin offering. So, and darosh, the reference to inquiring, seir shel Rosh Chodesh, that refers to the he-goat of Rosh Chodesh. So we see that all three of these sacrifices exist. Yachol shalashta nisrafu. Now, I might have thought that maybe all three of them were burned. Talmud lomar, v'hinei soraf, it was burned. So it shows that just one of them was burned. Echa nisraf, v'lo shalashtam nisrafu. Just one was burned and not all three were burned. And this can go, this brisa goes with both stories. It could go with the story of Rabbi Nehemiah being, and it was burned because it was a korban for just this, for every generation, and therefore it was not permitted to be eaten. Or, no, it was going to be eaten at night, but it became tamei according to, and it was the only one that became tamei according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. So darosh darash, the brisa continues. Why does it say that Moshe inquired insistently? So shtei drishos lama. Why? The double language suggests that there were two inquiries. So Amar lahu, Moshe said to Aaron and his sons, why was this sin offering burned? The elu munachos, and the other ones are not yet eaten. So ve'eni yodea ezehu. Now I wouldn't know which one of these was not yet was the one that was burned and which were not eaten. Kashehu omer ve'ota natan lachem las es es avon ha'ida. However, when the pasuk then continues and says that God gave it as a method of obtaining forgiveness for the sin of the community, have omer zes seir shel rosh chodesh. Well, the only sin offering, the only chatas that we reference, again, one is for the inauguration, one is for Nachshon ben Aminadav, and one is for Rosh Chodesh. The only one of those three that is actually to address a sin of the community is the one of Rosh Chodesh. And so as a result, that must be the one that we're referring to, Shapir Ka'amri Lei. Now, okay, so that's the end of the Brisa. So now we get to the questions that Rabbi Nechemia was asked by Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Shapir Ka'amri Lei. It was a good question, namely, why weren't there three things that were burned? Meaning, why didn't they burn the sacrifices of Nachshon ben Aminadav and the Shmini sacrifice, the 8th day of the inauguration? So Rabbi Nechemia l'tamei. No, Rabbi Nechemia would answer, as we know his logic is, D'amar kodshe shah lo pasle behu aninut. When it came to the aninut, what the aninut did not undermine is the idea that you would need to the sacrifices of this particular moment, of the celebration of the inauguration of the Mishkan. And both the 8th day and the sacrifice of Nachshon ben Aminadav are those kinds of sacrifices that the Aninut would not cover. The only sacrifice that the Aninut would cover is the sin offering on Rosh Chodesh. And so as a result, that's why he only that one was was burned, and the other two were not burned. Okay, well, there were two other questions. Amar Mar hayalo la'achla la'erev. Maybe they should just wait until the nighttime. So again, Shapir Kamrale, they asked a good question to Rabbi Nechemia. So Kasavar Aninut Laila Doraisa, Rabbi Nechemia is of the opinion that the Aninut of the night is also biblical. And again, because he says that the leniency associated with Aninut that is discussed in this psukim is about the nature of sacrifices of that particular moment, and not future, and not sacrifices for all generation. That's why you make the distinction. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who don't make it that distinction, they say that it was specifically at night that it would have been permitted for them. And so as a result, that's the way that they can't interpret it the same way as Rabbi Nechemia. Davar acher, v'alo Pinchas haya imahen. What about Pinchas? Why not let Pinchas eat the sacrifices? So Shapir Kamrei, again they asked a great question. So Savar Lak Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Nechemia holds like Rabbi Elazar. And what does Rabbi Elazar say? To Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Elazar says in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Lonis Kahain Pinchas Ad Shaharagu Lezimri. That when does Pinchas become a Kohen? He was not a Kohen from day one. He was born already when they left Egypt, and therefore he was already in existence at the time that the Kohanim were being sanctified. And only the Aaron and his sons became Kohanim, and then their sons thereafter. Any son who already existed was not going to be a Kohen at that time. Diksiv v'haisa lo uzaro acharav bris kunas olam. That only then does it seem, according to the Torah, one can understand that he was given at that moment the covenant of eternal priesthood. That this pasuk is a pasuk in Bamidbar, Parakaf Hey, pasuk Yud Gimel. That pasuk is in connection with the beginning of Parshas. The beginning of Parshas Pinchas, and the point being that is the moment that he became a Kohen. And so, according to Rebbe Lazar. And so, as a result, the story of the dedication of the temple, of the Mishkan, happened 30-something years earlier. And so, as a result, he was not yet a Kohen at that time. And so that's why we couldn't just leave it for Pinchas to eat. Ravashi Amar. Ravashi goes further and says, actually, even at the time that Pinchas killed Cosby and Zimri, they were not. He was not yet become a Kohen because Ad Sham Shalom ben Hashvatim. When did he become a Kohen? He became a Kohen when he made peace among the tribes. And Rashi tells us what the story was. Top line in the wide lines of Rashi on the bottom of Kuf Aleph Amud Bet. Shisham Shalom ben Hashvatim. B'yamei Yehoshua. In the days of Joshua. B'shevet b'nei Gad u'b'nei Ruvain. In the tribes, in the portion of the tribes of the children of Gad and Ruvain, that's on the other side of the Jordan River, because those two tribes, along with half of Manasseh, stayed on the eastern side of the Jordan. Shebanu es hamizbeach be'ever Yarden. They built a very large. The Navi tells us a large altar on the other side of the Jordan, and all the other tribes were a little bit worried about it. Ubakshu shar shvatim la'alot alehem litzava. And so the other tribes were saying, were thinking, "Ooh, these guys are trying to engage in idolatry, and that's why they built this large altar." And so they wanted to go to war against them. The shalchu es Pinchas, and they sent Pinchas the Kohen to them, lidaberi mahem, to speak to them. And what is the psukim then indicate that? And then the next pasuk tells them that why did they build this? Because they wanted everybody to know that they were part of the Jewish people. And so it really was not about idolatry. And what does it say about that? Shene'amar vayishma Pinchas haKohen unisiyei ha'edah v'rashei alfei Yisrael. And so Pinchas the Kohen heard what they had said, that they were not actually trying to rebel against God. And so as a result, peace reigned. There was no war. There was not an internal war as a result. And the point is that only here do we see that Pinchas is called Pinchas HaKohen. Whereas, as Rashi says, second line in the wide lines of Rashi at the bottom of the file from a bet, B'kol makom, everywhere else in the Torah, atamotse, what you find is the following language. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen. When you understand those words, the word the Kohen is not referring back to Pinchas. Ein kenu kuna ksuba ela Belazar. The kuna in that pasuk is referring back only to Elazar. And so bekan ksuba bepinchas. And here, only now, only in Sefer Yoshua, do we find that that's the moment that we refer to Pinchas as a Kohen. V'idach nami. Well, 1 second. How could Rav Ashi say that Pinchas became a Kohen at the time of killing Cosby and Zimri? When it says v'haksiv v'hisal lo zaro acharav. So 1 second. How does Rav Ashi understand the pasuk that says that he's going to be a Kohen? The eternal priesthood is going to apply to him and his offspring after him. So Rav Ashi would explain ki ksiv hahu bibrachahu tiksiv. When it saw that verse is about a blessing, and Rashi and Tosfos offer an explanation that what it means is, according to Rashi, hahu kra, third line down in the wide lines of Rashi, hahu kra hasam bibracha ksiv. Ksiv bisro shalo tifsoku na mizaro aval adayin lo niskahin. That what it's telling us is when it comes to his future generations, that the priesthood won't leave. But it does not mean that he became a priest immediately. And Tosos understands that, take a look at this second Tosos on the page. Hahu bebracha hu diksiv shebaruch HaKadosh Baruch Hu shehiyeh kohen. That the blessing was that he would become a kohen. Umiyad haya yachol liot kohen. He could have become a kohen immediately. Ela shetchilat sarach lahavlisha lahalbisho ulmoshcho ulchancho. But he would need to go through the inauguration process of a Kohen to put on the garments and to get anointed and to offer the special first sacrifice of mincha sacrifice, kedin hedyotot, like all regular Kohanim, hamechanchim b'chavitin, that begin their service with a special offering. Kedamrinim b'sof hatchalas, as we're going to learn in Maseches Menachos. But maybe the Jewish people didn't want him to become Kohen at that time. Because he had killed one of the Shvatim. Ad Shesam Shalom ben Hashvatim. Until he eventually made peace among the tribes. In the days of Yoshua. And so at that moment, then Nisratzulo, then they wanted him. They'll be Shu, Umashchu, V'chanchu. And so that is when he inaugurated and began to be a Kohen. So now we have a question in the other direction. One second, the Idach Nami. How does Rebbe Lazar understand the pasuk in Yoshua, v'haksiv v'yishma Pinchas HaKohen? Why does it specifically refer to him as a Kohen there? Hahu liyachas zaro acharav. And so the point there is to say that at that moment, he didn't just become a Kohen. He became the source of all Kohen Gadols, of all high priests. All the high priests are descended from Pinchas. And so what we'll do is we'll pick up from there at that time. It's because what we're next going to discuss is how is Moshe a Kohen Gadol or not? You know what? Maybe we'll do just a short little bit, because having mentioned that, having mentioned that Pinchas became a Kohen, we're going to use the psukim and use the question that we just asked on Rabbi Nehemiah to say, well, why didn't Pinchas eat the sacrifice? We're going to use that as a proof to show that maybe Moshe is not a Kohen. So Amar Rav, Rav says, Moshe Rabbeinu Kohen Gadol v'cholet b'kodshei Shemayim haya. That in fact, Moshe was a Kohen Gadol and he shared in the offerings. Shneamar me'el hamiluim l'Moshe haya lamana. That Moshe got from the inauguration sacrifices a portion. So Meisvei, 1 second, Pinchas hayayimayin. What about the question that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon asked to Rabbi Nehemiah? Was it, why didn't they let the sacrifice be eaten by Pinchas? V'im Isa. But if it's true that Moshe was a Kohen, Lema v'halo Moshe Rabbeinu hayayimayin. They should have asked about Moshe. No, Dilma Shiny Moshe. Maybe Moshe is different. To Tari B'Shchina, he was always busy engaging with Hashem. To Amar Mar, Moshe b'hashkama Allah b'hashkama yarad. Because Moshe got up in the morning to go up to receive the Torah, and he would go down during the days of getting ready to receive the Torah. He would go up in the morning and he would come down in the morning, meaning all the day he was busy talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So maybe that's a special situation, and so that's why they didn't ask from him. So Meisvei lechem elokav mikochei hakodashim u'min hakedoshim yochel, that it says that from the bread of God, from the kodesh kodashim and from the kodashim may he eat. So im nemru kodesh kodashim. So we're going to quote a brisa and says that in fact, when it comes to a kohen, this is a brisa that's talking about a kohen with a blemish. He's not allowed to offer sacrifices, but he is allowed to eat from them. So, and it tells us that he can eat not just from Kodshei Kodshim, but also from Kodshim. Now, why does it say that he can eat from both? Im namru Kodshei Kodshim, if he can eat from the super holy sacrifices, lama nemar Kodshim kalim. Why tell us about the regular sacrifices? V'im namru Kodshim kalim, lama nemar Kodshei Kodshim. Why say both? So the answer is ilu lo nemar kodesh kalim. If they didn't tell us about kodesh, the less holy sacrifices, hayiti omar, I might have thought the following: kodshim hu de okel. That why can the blemished Kohen eat super holy sacrifices? Because there is a situation where even a non-Kohen has been able to eat these super holy sacrifices. And therefore, kachim kalam lo yochal, but maybe they would not be able to eat the regular sacrifices. V'ilu lo nemar kachim kachim, and if they weren't able to eat holy sacrifices, if we didn't mention the holy sacrifice, the super holy sacrifices, hayite omer v'kachim kalam yeheyochel shehein kalam. Maybe they can only eat the less holy sacrifices because they're by definition less holy. V'kachim kachim lo yeheyochel, and they wouldn't be able to eat. L'kach nemru kachim kachim, l'kach nemru kachim kalam. That's why it had to say both. So Katani Miha. So what's the question? Why did we quote this whole price? So we saw Shaharehu Trulazar Lahen. We say that when it comes to the super holy sacrifices, they were allowed to be eaten by a non-Kohen. Lav Moshe, isn't this a reference to Moshe, showing that Moshe was not a Kohen, contrary to what Rav just taught us? So Amar Rav Sheshes Lo, no. This is referring to the time when we were able to offer sacrifices on individual, independent bamot. And this applies to the one who says that there were mincha offerings on a bama. And on a bama, you didn't need a Kohen to offer the sacrifice, and you didn't need and so as a result, a non-Kohen would be able to eat the the Kodesh Kodeshim sacrifice of a mincha offering. We are not yet done challenging Rav's statement that was Moshe really a Kohen? But for that discussion, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. We're halfway through the 4 challenges to Rav. So if you're interested in learning whether Moshe should still be considered a Kohen, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. We will pick up, God willing, at 7:45 tomorrow, and in person and online. We will try to end by 8:25, so we have time to get downstairs for beginning of Shacharis. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Safe travels.